How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about Steam hardware. I hope you are having a great week playing a ton of video games. You guys know what I'm playing. Resident Evil Requiem. I'm almost done with the 4-hour run. Then I just have Insanity. The game is 100% complete and I am done with it for a little while. Let me know what you're playing down in the comments below. But today we've got a big video to get into because right now Game Developer Conference is going on over in San Francisco. And unlike something like Summer Game Fest or E3, this one's for people who work in the games industry. So it's a bunch of developers getting together, showing what they're working on, showing what technology they're going to use. And because of that, corporations like Valve do presentations that are private technically for developers. But this time around, Tyler McVicker from Valve News Network, I think he just goes by his actual name now, he was able to get the slideshow that Valve showed off during their private talk. And honestly, it tells you pretty much everything they were talking about. So I figured for today's video, it would be fun to go through it because there's a ton of great info inside of it. So they started out by just going through the history, it looks like, of how they got to now. So they started out with Steam Link, which was the streaming little box that was like the size of a deck of cards. You would plug it into your TV, directly connect to your PC, and stream games over your home Wi-Fi network to your TV. Everyone said that thing worked really well. I had one and I was in college. My college's Wi-Fi was terrible, so I never got it to work right, and I was always supremely jealous of them, but it looks like that's what got the ball rolling for SteamOS. So in that slide, they show one of their prototype original Steam machines. So like SteamOS 2.0. I don't know if we ever saw 1.0. It went 2.0, then now we have 3.0. Anyway, I'm sure they talked about how that kind of didn't work out because they were trying to get Windows developers to port their games to Linux, which took too much work and was too big of an investment. So the thing failed, really. It just didn't work out. So they got to work on the translation layer Proton, which, you know, translates Windows games a lot easier. It's basically plug and play for the developers if they want to use it. Then they moved on to Steam VR with stuff like the Valve Index and the Steam VR app itself, which, you know, is kind of similar to the original SteamOS in the sense that if you wanted these VR games to be on Steam VR, they needed their own custom port for Windows, right? Like, because most VR games are Android apps for the Oculus Quest platform. So getting people to port their games over to PC day one has not gone very well because, you know, VR is like a very niche sort of pool of people willing to spend money on games. And then in the next slide, they show all of those different slides with arrows pointing from them to a Steam Deck. So I'm sure what they talked about is how all of those mistakes and blunders kind of resulted in this perfect device that included SteamOS 3.0, which was the Steam Deck. And honestly, it's not that hard to track how we got from point A to point B. It all just kind of makes sense, right? Like, you got to fail to succeed. You got to figure out what's going to work. And sometimes that takes experimentation. And I'm glad we saw this stuff come to public light because most other corporations do this stuff behind the scenes. And then when they get to the device like the Steam Deck, because the public never got their hands on any of the prototypes, they have a lot of kinks to iron out that like they easily could have solved throughout the development process if they worked with people they wanted to sell their products to more. So you can see how all of those mistakes resulted in something obviously very good. And then following the natural progression, the arrows go from those slides to the Steam Deck, and then the Steam Deck arrows out to the Steam Machine, the Steam Controller, and the Steam Frame. You can see how it's like a linear timeline of an ecosystem growing naturally, which is why it's so successful. It makes a lot of sense. And then the next slide is where things get really interesting because it's called developing for SteamOS, and they get deep on verification. It seems like they really understand and feel the criticism about the verification program. They even say in a lot of these slides that they're working hard to fix the reputation of the verification program, which is good because that's a really essential tool for people who aren't super tuned in to the world of SteamOS, Steam Deck, and everything else like we are. You want to make it as easy as possible for the player while also making it as easy as possible for the developer to get their games on the platform in the first place. So I'm glad they're working hard to address this because they're obviously adding more devices to the potential pool that use SteamOS. Like they show the Legion Go 2 in the picture with the Steam Frame, the Steam Machine, and the Steam Deck. So like clearly they have their sights set on growth with SteamOS, which is good. Then there's a slide about common pitfalls that developers run into with Proton that says, please tell us if you need Proton workarounds, support more display aspect ratios because, you know, the Steam Deck is 16:10. A lot of these Android handhelds are 4:3 or 4:2, you know, because they're trying to emulate what the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS had. There's of course 16:9. There's ultra wide. They want developers to support every sort of aspect ratio because a lot of developers are console first. Consoles plug into TVs and monitors. Most monitors that people use, probably like 80 or 90%, are 16:9. But with more people adopting these different pieces of hardware using SteamOS, you want more aspect aspect ratio supported. And that's good because like a new game, Resident Evil Requiem, the last few Resident Evils, I'm pretty sure fill out the whole 16:10 aspect ratio of the Steam Deck, but Resident Evil Requiem, even if you set it at 1280 by 800, has the black bars. And on the OLED, it's not a big deal. On the LCD or the Legion Go S, it is a big deal because it's just annoying having those LCD grayed out black bars above and below your game. Because if we're being real, the bezel is already big enough on all of the above. The next thing they tell developers, I gotta give them a gold star for, they say don't save your graphic settings to the cloud. If you have another PC that you use in addition to your Steam Deck, you definitely have ran into this situation where you get the Steam Deck's graphics preset all figured out on the Steam Deck, and then you move over to your gaming PC to continue playing from where you left off, and then the Steam Deck's graphic settings are what are saved on your PC, so you change them on your PC, then the next time you get on your Steam Deck and your saved downloads, the graphics are reset and you got to go through all that trouble again. Most developers, I would say, in the modern day, like right now, are pretty good about having the settings saved to the device, but you just run into one game once in a while that has the settings saved in the cloud, and it just adds annoyance, right? Like the stuff that people don't like on PC is having to change the settings multiple times. Like once you have it dialed in, you want to keep it dialed in. So having an update or a save break your settings, it's enough to make people quit a game. And I know that because I've done it before. With older stuff that I'm just playing for fun, if I have to change the graphic settings multiple times, I'm just out, I'll play something else. And then the last thing that they scold developers over a little bit is this weird new phenomenon that's been popping up more and more over the past year, where when you boot a game up on your Steam Deck, it has a Steam Deck preset that they've figured out, the developer I mean, but then they lock out all the other settings, so you literally can't change them, and then you have to quit the game, you got to go to properties, you got to enter the command Steam Deck equals 0% command %. That's an annoyance in and of itself because I know I just said I don't want to screw with the settings too much, but once I have it dialed in, I want to be able to dial it in the first place. So like locking the settings behind a window based on what device I'm on, kind of stupid, and that introduces a problem for the Steam machine because I have my SteamOS PC. For a lot of games lately, I have to enter that Steam Deck equals 0 command even though I'm playing on a TV. It's stupid. Like you should have a Steam Deck preset, right? Like that's good. I like to see that more and more. You don't need that extra step where you lock me out from changing the settings at all, because clearly developers have a completely different idea of the best settings. Like Lords of the Fallen, it runs at the FSR Ultra performance at the absolute lowest settings. It literally looks like you're playing with your eyes squinted through a screen door. So like, even though they feel like that's the best settings for the Steam Deck, give me the option to switch them whenever I want. Same goes for Steam Machine. The next thing they talk about also makes me happy because it's anti-cheat. We know this is like a major thorn in the Steam Deck side, and it will be a thorn in the Steam Machine side because a lot of multiplayer games use anti-cheat that is not supported by SteamOS, but unfortunately they do point out that kernel level anti-cheat and secure boot are issues. Yeah, those are going to continue to be issues because even though people want anti-cheat supported on SteamOS, they don't want secure boot or kernel level access on Linux. That's like one of the biggest reasons people like using Linux, is because you have that control over everything, and when you start introducing features like that, it obviously causes problems. So like they have to figure that out, but I think that really comes down to like the user population. If you get enough people using SteamOS and or Linux as a whole, then you know developers will kind of be forced to support anti-cheat on SteamOS because they want to support the players who are willing to spend their money. It's kind of like a self-solving problem. Like it's on both sides of the fence. It's like mostly the developers and publishers' fault because there are options that work just fine and they just refuse to use them, which is annoying. Like Marathon and Destiny both use BattlEye, and BattlEye works on SteamOS. They're just willingly locking it out, so that's bad. But it's also on Valve because they are selling the hardware. So like they should be putting in a lot of effort to get it figured out. Hopefully they don't have to resort to introducing secure boot or kernel level access because people are not going to like that. I'm sure there's a happy middle ground that will make everyone happy. And now's where we get into compatibility. I'm glad they're thinking about this because there are some complications, right? Like we criticized the verification program on the Steam Deck, and now there's extra stuff to add in, like the Legion Go S, the Legion Go 2, the Steam Frame, the Steam Machine, other devices that are going to use SteamOS. They need to start working on this now, so I'm glad that they are. One cool thing they show is that on the Steam backend for developers, they can see what percentage of players who bought their game are playing on Steam Deck, and it gets granular. You can see how many people were playing on Steam Deck per day. I wish they showed an actual game, but it looks like they made them up because this one's called Hold in Your Farts. I don't think that's a real game. I didn't look. It might be a real game, but like, I don't think that's one you would use in a slideshow like this, because I don't think it would have a high peak concurrent players, but that's good data for developers to have because it kind of encourages them to support Steam Deck if a lot of people want to or are playing their game on Steam Deck. So now they can see that data. They say straight up that all games that are verified on Deck are going to be machine verified. That makes sense because you have more power in the machine. So if it works well on the Steam Deck, it's going to work well on the Steam machine. They're using the same operating system. So I appreciate that. But there's an interesting new layer, which is that if you want that Steam machine verified check mark, you got to make sure your game runs at 1080p 30 FPS at a minimum. Obviously that's native. So like if you're running at 1080p native, it's going to look pretty good if you scale it up with FSR to 4K, which is the target that Valve put out there with the initial Steam machine announcement. So having that performance metric in place, they didn't want to do it on Steam Deck. They kind of talk about it a little bit later on in the slideshow, and I disagree with their standard there. But yeah, I think it's good to say at a baseline, the machine should be able to run it at 1080p 30, and then of course use FSR to scale it up from there. Most games on console, like PS5, which is where the Steam machine kind of sits performance-wise, they're not even running 1080p native internally at all. They're upscaling from like 560p or 720p at points. So I think it's cool that they're setting the bar that high for the Steam machine to get verification check marks, because the verification system will then be useful, unlike how it is now on the Steam Deck. And then for the Steam machine, they're also removing the rule that says you need to have scalable text or have it be legible on the Steam Deck. That makes sense because, you know, these games were made for a TV or monitor, which is what you're using with the Steam machine. So I'm glad they thought about that. And then they have a whole flow chart for the verification pipeline. Basically how it shakes out is what I said earlier. If your game is Deck verified, it's machine verified. And if it's unsupported for performance, you can test it for the Steam machine and then know if it's going to be verified or not, because as they point out, the Steam machine is 6 times the power of the Steam Deck. So if there's a game that's right on the edge of being supported or playable, it'll probably work on Steam machine and be verified. And then they move into the Steam frame verification system. This one is a lot more stringent than either the machine or the Steam Deck, which makes sense because you get motion sickness if there's not smooth performance. So for standalone VR titles, you need to hit 90 FPS on the Steam frame to get verified. Again, you don't want motion sickness, so 90 FPS is going to make sure that doesn't happen. And then for 2D games, like playing regular Steam games on the frame, they're asking for 1280 by 720 at 30 FPS, which, you know, seems a little low, but it's going to look fine on the frame screen. And also you have to think about how they have an extra translation layer in place on top of Proton. So like the performance, at least at launch, is going to be a little bit rockier compared to something like the Steam Deck or the Steam machine. So this all tracks and makes sense for me is what I'm saying. They're also really trying to convince VR devs to just make one app. So if your game is already on Android, they're like, hey, we've got Lepton in place that'll translate it over to SteamOS just fine. If you only have a Windows version, we've got Proton, we've got Fex working together. We have options for either, but don't have 2 ports of your game if you don't have to, because their data shows that when developers have one version of a game, it sells better, it gets more players, it's more optimized, it results in a better product. So I like that they're kind of pushing developers to say, hey, don't do extra work if you don't have to. We covered all that work with our 2 translation layers, Proton and Fex for one, Lepton for the other. It's going to be just fine. If you already have an Android app for the Quest system, we've got that all figured out. You don't got to worry about anything. Just make sure it runs at 90 FPS on our hardware, which it definitely should based on that chip that they're using. It's pretty dang strong. And that brings us to the final notes. The only thing that really stood out to me there was them saying optimizing for lower spec machines expands your audience. Like, the fact that they have to tell developers that blows my mind. Like, they've been doing the Steam hardware survey for a while. We've been hearing publishers in their earnings calls say, wow, PC is really growing. You guys didn't take 2 seconds to look at that data and say, wow, 70% of people are on a 4060 level computer. And then you just go ahead and optimize your games. Not at all. You don't optimize your games. You build them in Unreal Engine 5. You throw in Lumen, you throw in Nanite, you put out games like Indiana Jones that have forced ray tracing, and then go, why is no one buying our game? No one's buying your game because they want decent performance. Look at how Resident Evil Requiem is selling right now. 5 million copies in the first weekend. It beat Resident Evil 2 Remake very quickly. The reason for that is because it runs like butter on PC. It looks good, and it just gives people what they want, which is a 10-hour single player experience with more stuff to unlock after you beat the game. It feels like it's worth the money. It's wild. When you make something that feels like it's worth the money and runs well on the hardware people have, and don't request that they upgrade to something that costs thousands of dollars, it works out better for you. So while it's crazy that they have to even point this out, I'm glad that they are, because they have the data to back it up, and developers and publishers really have no defense. Make your games run well sell on everything. And you could port them to Switch 2, where you might sell 1 billion copies because you have these random games on Switch 2 that come out where people just show up for them, right? If you have a third-party game that's not exclusive to every platform, it really helps to just target the hardware people have. I don't know why this needs to be spelled out, but again, I'm glad it was. So that wraps up the slideshow. I've got one more tidbit of info for those real ones who stick around till the end. They're showing off the Steam Machine and the Steam Frame like in real life. They're letting people touch it, they're letting people play on it, and it looks pretty cool. Like it's crazy how tiny it is. I'm not going to talk about what demos they're showing or how they perform just yet, but yeah, they were adamant that they are shipping it this year. That's what they're telling everyone. They made a joke about needing RAM if anyone has a line on it, and people are like, oh, Valve is saying that they need RAM. They're trying to buy it off the people at GDC. They made a joke. People take these things so literally, but yeah, they are going to ship both products this year, and I'm really excited. Oh, and just a quick update on my watch saga. I was not able to get the Resident Evil one. I got a lot of DMs from people who did get them, which is good for you. I'm happy. I'm very jealous, but no one had an extra. So I just did what I was originally going to do and bought the Hamilton Khaki Field Auto Chrono. Came in a day. I got it for a great price. It looks awesome. Life's about compromise. I'm not going to like let it ruin my day that I wasn't able to get a watch where only 300 of them came to the United States. I gave it my best effort, but I'm happy with what I got. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in this one. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.